Hello everyone, I'm Soheil Shirangi, composer and music teacher. Over the past few years, I've shared performances of my works on my YouTube channel. But now I want to expand by adding training videos about composition and music in general. I try to keep the content concise, practical, and as useful as possible while maintaining an academic approach. Please feel free if you have comment or question. Thank you. First of all, I want to clarify this is merely a summary and overview. I strongly encourage you to explore additional sources, especially books and studying Bach's Fugues. They will be extremely helpful. I advise you to watch my previous videos and practice each part individually. To support me, please subscribe my page and give it a like before we get started. What is a fugue? The term fugue comes from the Latin root meaning fugitive or unstable. It's a musical form with a contrapuntal structure. While the fugue has roots in medieval music, it's most associated with the Baroque period, particularly with the fugues composed by Bach. It's important to note that there isn't a single specific model or structure for all fugues, but I will focus on the most widely used forms. A typical fugue structure usually includes 5 main sections: exposition, counter-exposition, development, re-exposition, and finally coda. The exposition is the most important part of the fugue. It serves as the source of main ideas, laying the foundation for everything that allows in the next part. This is very similar to the exposition in invention, right? The exposition typically begins with a simple progression with 2 or more voices based on the subject. The subject is initially introduced alone and unaccompanied. Then it's imitated and repeated multiple times throughout the piece with accompaniment of other voices. Each time, the repetition and sequence happen in different form and intervals. With following this, the fugue is further developed through techniques such as modulation, episode, counter-exposition, and Stretto. Overall, the expansion and development of the subject and counter-subject creates a sense of unity within the fugue. In the exposition, the subject is first introduced by the first voice in the tonic, and then answer to the subject is presented by the other voices, typically in dominant or sometimes subdominant. Finally, the subject returns in the tonic key, but in different voices. There are 2 types of answer to the subject: the real answer and tonal answer. The real answer is a direct transposition of the subject melody, meaning all intervals remain the same. The tonal answer is a transposed version, where some intervals are slightly altered to better fit the harmony of the key. Another answer type is the imitative answer. This gives the composer more freedom, as the answer can be altered or even shortened compared to the subject. It allows the composer to vary the intervals using 2nd, 3rd, 6th, and 7th instead of just 4th, 5th, or octave, adding more variety and interest to the music. Additionally, a real or tonal fugue can be transformed into an imitative fugue in this modulation. Before the entry of the 3rd voice, there is an important part called the Codetta. The Codetta is a brief passage in the exposition that connects 2 entries of the theme. It typically lasts a few beats or bars and consists of 3 counterpoints. It helps the composer close on the tonic and prepares entry of the 3rd voice in the tonic. An entry of the 3rd voice with repeating the subject in the tonic. In rare case happen in dominant. We can hear counterpoints by 1st and then 2nd voice. There are two types of entries, real and false. Real entries happen when a new voice fully presents the subject melody, while a false entry happens when a voice begins the subject melody but stops before completing it, creating a sense of anticipation or tension before the actual entry. The fourth voice answers the subject in the dominant, while the other three voices provide counterpoint. After the fourth voice, the exposition concludes, marking the most important part of the fugue. Following this, a brief section known as the episode leads into the development of the subject and counter-subjects. This subject is not fully stated here. Instead, fragments or motifs derived from the subject are used to create a contrasting passage, often involving modulation to a different key. Now I am going to mention the tools of exposition parts. Counter-subject, a fixed melody that accompanies with the subject or response. It's usually in fugues with three voices. There are two counter-subjects, and in fugue with four voices there are three counter-subjects. Another one is response subject. It's just the first restatement of the subject in the new voice, and the next one is free counterpoint. It's any accompaniment material that is not repeated regularly, appearing only once or sporadically in different sections of the fugue. If one voice has a counter subject, the other parts accompanied by free counterpoints. All small parts that I mentioned, it must be interesting for creating a unity of fugue. The next part is counter-exposition, or sometimes we call it second exposition. This is not always a part of fugue. Sometimes happen and sometimes not, with two entries in reverse order. Now you see all exposition part of Beethoven's Fugue in C-sharp minor. As I introduced before, the voices usually enter in different order than in the first exposition. It's separated by an episode and in the same key, the original exposition. Although Bach used this tonic and dominant of relative tonality, other composers in the next generation use further away tonality. In development part, composer use some techniques including canon or exact imitation, fragmentation, sequence, and decorating, augmentation, changing the rhythm of the subject or response, and others that you can see now. And the important part is really practical, is invert, retrograde, and finally invert of retrograde. Usually, the composer avoids returning to the main tonality during the process, often within a new key. In this example, I selected the starting episode part. As I point out, episode plays a significant role in unity of development. Despite its base on the subject, plays between presenting subject and distracts the listener's attention to another topic for creating more attraction of hearing against subjects. Now, I'm going to introduce you one of the another important part of the development, stretto, Italian word which basically means a string. The composer tried to close the answer of the subject as much as possible to the subject for a more beautiful and effective effect. The stretto is also sometimes attached to the closing section, like Coda. The stretto responds fully or partially to the subject. The use of the stretto may not be present in some fugues. It's because the harmonic structure of the subject doesn't allow for compression and imitation. As you can see in this example, stretto ending with the end of the fugue. The next part is fugue is re-exposition. Like development part is unpredictable. There are not a specific standard model for this part. Despite it's not the exact part of the exposition, returning in the main tonality is so crucial. Although certainly it appears some part of the subject and counter subject has a different order. The time of this part usually is 1/3 of the whole fugue, but it will be shorter. The coda, it's the closing section, often ends with a few beats to several measures of the subject or parts of it repeats on the pedal note in the dominant or tonic, or in the form of a stretto. As you might observe in this example by Bach, he used some extra patterns freely in his coda to make it richer, and in some cases has a mode of recitative. In the end of the coda must be within a perfect cadence. Thank you so much for watching my video. If you enjoyed it, feel free to share with your friends. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video.